Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. Welcome to Eliminating FAFSA Stress Expert Tips for 2025-2026 Application Success. My name is Kumba McGill. I'm a relationship manager here at Ascent Funding, a leading provider of innovative loan products and student support services. At Ascent, our mission is to empower students to access higher education and achieve academic and financial success. We provide co-created financial resources, college planning tools, and flexible loans for undergraduate and graduate students. I'll be your host today as we help demystify the FAFSA process. Whether you're applying for the first time or navigating the changes to this year's FAFSA, this webinar is designed to provide actionable tips to ease your stress and meet deadlines and help you secure the funding that you need for college. Before we dive in, let's go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. We want you to get the most out of this webinar, and the best way to do that is to engage and ask lots of questions in the chat box at the designated time. I'll guide our panelists through some predetermined questions. You might find that some of your questions are answered during that time period, but if they aren't, don't worry. During the designated Q&A portion for the audience, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions in the chat, and I'll be able to read those directly to our experts, and they'll be able to give you feedback. Just a quick reminder, the answers given during this webinar are not intended to be tax, legal, or investment advice. If you'd like guidance on unique strategies for your specific family, please reach out to Peg or Bill's companies directly to schedule an appointment with an expert to discuss your specific case. Lastly, for all those that are on this webinar that stays to the end, you will be eligible for our scholarship giveaway, which will be announced via email. Without further ado, I would like to get this webinar started here. I would like to formally introduce our expert panelist. Peg Keough is Director of Education at College Aid Pro. She is a college financial planner who specializes in working with parents who have college-bound high school students. Through her specific guidance, parents take a proactive role in creating a comprehensive college funding plan to maximize financial aid and discounts on the cost of college. Peg's background in financial planning and investments, coupled with her expertise in college financial planning, make her uniquely qualified to support families. She has also been through this process with her twin children, so she completely gets it. Peg is a recognized thought leader and a frequent speaker at schools and organizations around the country. Next, I would like to introduce Bill Wozniak. Bill has been helping Hoosier families, colleges, and high schools with financial aid initiatives since 2003. In his role as Vice President of Communications and Student Services, he manages InvestEd's financial aid advising efforts consisting of resources and programming, which Bill played a significant role in identifying and creating. The InvestEd outreach team will conduct over 1,000 events this year, covering all parts of Indiana, and help more than 15,000 additional individuals with answers for their specific education funding questions. So I'd like to welcome Bill and Peg. All right. Some of the things that we're going to cover today, we want to let you know that we got you, right? Because this process can be a little bit confusing, it can be a little bit frustrating, but we're going to cover FAFSA basics and key changes to the 2025-2026 application. We're going to go over some important due dates and deadlines, some key terms that you may be familiar with or not familiar with, but our experts will go into specific details and what's changed, as some folks who experienced this last year can understand all the craziness that was surrounding it. So it's been revamped, so we're going to walk you through that process and the actual application itself, answer some frequently asked questions, and then just kind of tips to avoid common mistakes and just some additional questions that may come up during this process. By the end of the session, our goal is to make you feel confident and equipped to submit your FAFSA on time. Okay. So I just kind of want to get a feel for folks' experience coming into this webinar. If you have not filled out the FAFSA, what's holding you back from submitting the FAFSA today? Please go ahead and put your answers in the chat. And if you have submitted the FAFSA, what concerns do you have? What kind of hiccups have you experienced? If you can go ahead and put those answers in the chat right now, just so we can kind of see where the lay of the land is before we kind of dive into the specifics of this presentation. Okay. So you can go ahead and put some of your answers. If you have If you have concerns about filling out, okay, so getting parental information. Anybody else? Thank you, Caitlin, for that information. Being overwhelmed and time consuming, totally understandable. Parents' information, okay. What do you get? Not receiving enough aid. And these are all legitimate concerns, and we hope to answer a lot of these questions here today, right? So as we're going through this presentation, please think of great questions that you have lined up for our experts, because at the Q&A portion, audience Q&A portion, I will get to these questions, okay? So I see lots of parents getting your parents' information, stressed and concerned about that, okay? All right, thank you so much. So let's dive right in, right? What is the FAFSA and why is it important, and reasons why students don't submit the FAFSA? So I'll go ahead and pass that over to you, Bill, and you can go ahead and dive into those questions.
So the items, I'm enjoying the comments in the chat, because this is exactly what we see and hear night after night as we travel across, in my case, the state of Indiana, as we talk to the different families, the concerns about, maybe the parent, which is now the contributors, often the parent, they don't want to file, they don't want to submit their portion, they don't want to do that part. And that's such a big deal, because if it is the parent that has to be the contributor, that's such a critical part. It's just part of the process, and it has to be done. When it is needed, it has to be done. So we hear this all the time. And one of the other items, there was so many great items in the chat, thinking I'm going to get enough aid, or how much aid am I going to get? The point that we always try to make with families and students is they often don't think about institutional aid and the money that can come from the college itself. So maybe you aren't going to get the Pell Grant, or maybe you're not going to get a particular state grant, but then there's the money from the institutions themselves. So filing the FAFSA is the way to put yourself in position for all the different types of aid. And that's why we never want to see a family skip that step, because it's really hard to know all the different types of aid you may get.
Can you also break down, I see here it says free application for student financial aid, for folks who may be completely new to that term and what it is, and kind of that's just the whole importance of it. And thank you so much for that, Bill.
Yeah, I would just add to that all the colleges in this country are discounting their costs. So you don't want to look at that sticker price, cost of attendance, that whole enchilada, if you will, and say, oh my gosh, we can't afford that, $60,000, because your family could get significant discounts at that school that could take the cost much lower. It just depends. But the FAFSA, filling out these financial aid forms, like Bill said, that's a first step so that you're on their radar, and then there could be these discounts. And as he said, the institutional, the endowment money they're handing out in the form of need-based grants is the best place to get these discounts. And I'll also add the other sort of discounts, the merit scholarships, which is based on your child grades and test scores and talents. Some schools want that FAFSA on file to give that money too. So it's really, really important to, I know it's a bit scary and stressful, but hopefully by the end of tonight, you'll be able to get over that hump and get that FAFSA in.
I always chuckle at the free application for federal student aid, because it's state aid, it's institutional aid, it's so much more than federal aid. So I always kind of chuckle at the name.
So I see here it's kind of it's a gateway to federal grants, work study opportunities, loans to fund your education, right? So anything that you would expand on that, and then some reasons why some students don't submit that you're aware of.
One of the biggest reasons, and you've got it on here, is that people say, oh, my sister told me not to bother, I'm not going to get anything. And I tell people, friends and family are lovely, but when it comes to your college financial planning journey, you really need, everybody's unique, and you really need to do your own thing. Like, we tell every family they should submit the FAFSA, and there's a lot of reasons. I mean, you mentioned loans a minute ago, Kumba. I mean, there's the federal direct student loans. As long as the student submits the FAFSA, they're automatically eligible. And for most families, that's the first place to start if you need to take out loans. And it's a manageable amount of debt, because there's maximums that the federal government has put out. So that's a big reason. people just they just say, I make too much, I'm never going to get anything, and that is not always true. People in this space, you just don't know what you don't know, and that's not meant to be critical at all. It's just there's a lot in this space, and a lot of it is counterintuitive. So again, can't stress enough that if you don't fill this out, it can have repercussions, and it's definitely going to make college a lot more expensive for most families.
And I saw in the chat a comment, they were disappointed in the results, and that does happen. The first thing we always tell families is, number one, when you're talking to any group of families, we hear much more often than not, I can't believe I got that. I can't believe I got that. Just night after night across the state, I can't believe how much I got. But again, there are times where people are expecting more and they don't get it. They don't like the results. That does happen. But again, even somebody that was expecting 8 and they got 2, it's $2,000 that they weren't going to have otherwise, and things of that nature. So everything is relative. But yes, it doesn't always end up what you would hope. But more often than not, it's more than a lot of people expected they would get.
Now, there's so many due dates and deadlines, right? If y'all can just kind of go through the process, like when's the application open? When do students have to submit it by? Are there any types of, if you fill it out and you make a mistake, like any types ways they can go ahead and correct it? Is there a deadline associated with that? Go ahead and toss that to you, Peg, to start.
Sure. Yeah. So hopefully this coming fall, the FAFSA will go back to normal, whatever you want to call that, and it will go live October 1 for that year's seniors in high school. That's normally how it works. For some parents that have older kids, it's been a bit crazy the last 2 years. This year, right now, is much better than last year because the FAFSA, as Kumba said at the beginning, had a major revamp starting with the 24-25 school year. So fingers crossed, this coming fall, it will go live October 1 for all families that have a senior. So that's the first piece. Most families don't have to go in there on October 1, and we tell most of them not to because there's a lot of traffic and it can crash and all that sort of thing. The deadlines that really matter are the deadlines of the colleges, and colleges have what they call priority financial aid form deadlines. The incoming freshmen, that's going to be the earliest deadline. If you have kids that are already in college, that will be a later deadline to resubmit the FAFSA. So it's really important to find out what those deadlines are for your child's list and shoot to get that FAFSA in a week before the earliest deadline. I say that because like out here in Seattle, we have windstorms and all of a sudden the power's out, right? And it can be out for 4 days and you don't have internet. So don't wait until the last minute. The only thing I will add to that is if you are eligible for state aid in your state, you're going to want to get that in sooner rather than later. If the first deadline isn't for a month, say, I tell families, oh, you are eligible for the Washington State grant. Get it in within like the end of the first week, just so you're in the queue. Some states will look at that because, as we said, and Bill said, the state aid comes off of the FAFSA as well, the results. So that, if you're eligible for state aid, you want to look at your state, or if you're looking at a college that's what's called first come, first served. Most colleges do not function that way, but if you're looking at colleges that are like that, then you want to get it in as soon as possible. Missing deadlines is very, very punitive because that gives the college the opportunity to give your child and your family less money because you missed that deadline. You're not in that first bucket of awarding. And I've seen it happen time and time again. As far as there isn't a universal deadline, because I know we'll probably get that question, it's based on the school. It's also based on how your child applies for admission. So if they apply early decision, which is usually the earliest deadline, or early action, that's an earlier deadline, then the corresponding deadline for the financial aid forms will be earlier. Whereas if your child applies regular decision for admission, the deadline will be a bit later. So I know it gets a little confusing, but it varies by school, and then it varies at that school based on how your child's applying for admission.
The only thing I'll add is I saw in the chat where someone commented they thought the FAFSA this year was much simpler to fill out. And we were one of the entities that federal student aid chose to be part of the beta testing. And so we were in that window, and we were very happy as the beta testing was going along and families were getting through the form, which was much different than a year ago, let's say. And it was going well, and it's been going well. So we're seeing it. It's open. It's time to get it done. And it is going much better this year. So let's keep our fingers crossed, but it's going much better.
It is. It is. You got to hand it to the government on this one. They saw what they did last year. They brought in some people, and in the beta testing, they did it very methodically and intentionally, so it wasn't live and craziness. And yeah, it's been flowing well. And to Bill's point, yeah, you got to get in there. We've been doing FAFSAs with families through the beta time for people that fell in that, and then once it went live, and yeah, we've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and it's going well. It's going well.
Yeah, it really is. I did it for my daughter, and it took, I think I was done in less than 20 minutes. It was that easy, and that ease of use was great. For folks that are on the screen you see here, be sure to check your state deadlines by scanning the QR code. So if you have a cell phone like this, you can take about 10 seconds, scan it to the screen, and you will be able to pull up the FAFSA state deadlines, as Peg said, and you can go there and see when those are. So I'll give you about 10 seconds to do that. So you're able to just pull that up and have that for later on after the webinar, if you want to go ahead and access those due dates for your specific states and see when those are coming up.
I'll just add while you're doing that, picking up the code, if you have corrections on here, you can make corrections. So you might hear something that Bill and I say tonight where you're like, uh-oh, I made a mistake. You'll be able to log into your child's studentaid.gov account. There's what's called a FAFSA submission summary. That's a new name. It used to have a different name. And there will be a correction area in there, so you can make corrections. So don't, take a deep breath. If you hear something that you feel like you made a mistake, it's okay. You can make corrections.
Awesome. Okay. So we talked a lot about, briefly, I should say, about the changes from last year to this year. So if you all can just kind of walk us through some of these changes. I see there's some questions were changed. There's more languages is offered. The student aid index went from EFC to SAI. So y'all can just walk us through some of those changes for some folks that are on this webinar who may have experienced last year's application, and then folks who are new to this year, but they still need to kind of know about some of the adjustments that have been made. Bill?
Yeah, so I'll just jump on a couple, and then Peg can jump on a couple, and hopefully we get everything covered. The one item in the chat that we get every night, and I just want to touch it, where one of the attendees said, when do you normally find out what you get? The interesting thing here is with the FAFSA, this is the collection form of all the information. So you have to file it, you have to get it done, but then that's going to send the information to the federal government, the state governments, and the schools. And then they're going to send you an award letter talking about what you're going to get, which then combines everything. So it's really when you get the award letter from the school. But the first step is to file the FAFSA, get that done, and that puts everything else in motion. And just grabbing a couple here real quick, the 36 questions, then the 108. The really important point that we try to emphasize here, the FAFSA does a lot of things underneath, like pulling in the tax information. So I'm sure Peg, and I know me and my team, for so long, it was pencils and paper and erasers. And then we got to the early days of doing it online, but the skip logic was not like it is now, and the things that are happening underneath the FAFSA. So questions would disappear. You answer a question a certain way, you don't get other questions. And like I said, the tax information now pulls from the IRS underneath, as opposed to before, there was a lot of math and knowing which line to take and all that. So 36 questions, a lot less questions, a lot more skip logic and understanding within the form. There have been changes about how family size and adjusted gross income is calculated and used in the calculation. And that's where we talk about expanded access to Pell Grants. And this is where I'll pause after this. The expanded access to Pell Grants, when the redo, the methodology change in the FAFSA was looked at by FSA, one of the things was to try to get more families to be eligible for aid. So how the information you put into the form is then treated with the student aid index that we'll talk about a little bit. So the methodology was changed a little bit to try to open up more families. And what we've seen here in the last year in our state was we do think that more families are being eligible for that type of aid. So there's all these wonderful things that are going on behind the scenes that have helped a lot of families. Just picking a few things there from the screen. Peg, wherever you want to go.
Sure, yeah, and I saw a couple of questions in the Q&A, and one of them's relevant here. Somebody said, you know, what if I've had a baby since that tax year? Because everything is pulling the 2023 tax year. It's called prior year. If you've had a baby, that family size that's up on this slide, you can edit that, and you absolutely should look at it, because we're finding that what auto populates is typically not accurate. So even if it was accurate for 2023, but now you have another person in the household like a baby, and congratulations, by the way, you would want to change that family size. So don't worry about that. You can definitely adjust it. It did, as Bill mentioned, that movement of your federal tax information, it's called the Direct Data Exchange, into the FAFSA. You have to do that unless you fall under an exception. If you have, you know, older kids, the old DRT, you could say, nah, I don't want you to move it. I want to manually put my numbers. You can't do that anymore. And so it is what it is. You might not like it, but it is what it is. It moves in, it tells you it's done it. That's a pretty significant change. The actual calculation, I won't bore you and get into, because I'm a big nerd about this stuff, but get into all the micro changes that they made with this student aid index, but they made some significant changes of what's included and what's not included. One of the biggies that affects a lot of people, and it would have affected me if my kids were young still, because I have twins. If you have 2 kids in college, it doesn't give you credit for that. And what I mean by that is, it used to be that the amount you could afford for a year, that EFC that's now called the SAI, used to be cut almost in half. And Congress got rid of that. They increased some other stuff. In my opinion, it doesn't really balance it out, but it's one of these in life. It is what it is. It's important for you to understand that. That's a big change. So if you have multiples, or you have a sophomore and a junior in high school, you're going to have 3 crossover years. So that's something to keep in mind. You know, as Kumba said, I'm a financial planner by background. That's a planning opportunity. And I don't want to get off topic, but there's another financial aid form that still does give families credit if there's multiple kids in school. So that was a really big one. The other one I want to touch on is if you're divorced or separated. If you are, only one parent is submitting the FAFSA, and that parent is called the custodial parent. And the definition, this has always been the case, that one parent submits, but the definition of custodial parent changed, and it's now the parent that provided the most financial support on a year look back from when you literally are hitting submit on that form. So that again is another planning opportunity, because some families are 50-50 or close to 50-50. If they can make it work, you always want to be honest. You always want to answer these questions accurately. But one parent could just spend a little bit more on your child. You're providing more support, and then you're putting your best foot forward to get the most aid and submitting the FAFSA with that parent as the custodial parent. There's a lot of other changes, but I think those are the big ones on top of what Bill was talking about.
And to piggyback off of what you just said, Peg, who is eligible for the FAFSA, right? And how do they stay eligible? If you want to kind of walk us through the eligibility process.
Sure. If a child is a US citizen, because it's the student, it's the child's FAFSA in essence, and other people are what's called contributors, that's a new word, into the FAFSA. So the student can be a US citizen. There's another term, and you can see the other bullets here, but there's another term, eligible non-citizen. That's the exact term. So if you Google that, there's a really nice short definition of who falls in that group. And if you're an eligible non-citizen, you're also eligible to submit the FAFSA. If you are not eligible, different states have other forms. For example, and Bill can chime in if Indiana has this, but in the state of Washington, where I am, they have the WASFA, WASFA. And so that's for kids that are not eligible to submit the FAFSA, they can submit the WAFSA. So keep that in mind. If you're not eligible. And then this slide does a good job at talking about how you stay eligible. You have to maintain a certain GPA. You don't want to default on your student loans for many reasons, but this is one of them, right? Keep your non-citizen status intact. That's what I was talking about, the eligible non-citizen. You need to obviously stay enrolled in the program, you know. And there are, as I said earlier, there are maximums for most kids. The maximum they can borrow is $27,000 for the federal direct student loans. Some kids that are considered independent or their parents maybe got denied on a federal parent loan will get a little more, but once you reach that maximum for that specific student, then you wouldn't be eligible anymore.
And the only thing I'll add on top of that, because that was thorough and wonderful, the only thing I'll add, for every 10 or 20 times we get asked, well, I probably shouldn't file, it's 20 to 1 or more where it's better to file than to not file, because we get it all the time. And in almost all cases, it's better to file. Again, even in some of the sort of places where you would think not filing is the way to go, there's other types of aid that are not the normal, maybe the Pell or maybe the state of Indiana grants or things like that, that are real clear. And then there's other types of aid where the FAFSA is required. And so in most cases, the answer is to file.
Yeah,
If you
private
don't feel eligible-
scholarships can
Yeah.
require the FAFSA, some private
Right.
scholarships. I mean, some colleges, if you don't submit the FAFSA and you appeal an award you get, they might look and see, well, how hard up can this family really be? They didn't file the FAFSA. It can really sting in a lot of places and you won't really know. So I think we're making a very good case for submitting the FAFSA.
And,
If you
and
don't
it
know if
doesn't
you're
affect your
eligible-
credit score.
Exactly. If you don't know if you're eligible or not, apply anyway. It's the best default way to make sure
Exactly.
at least you get what you're qualified for. Okay. Now to just kind of get into the application and stuff, like what do they need to be to get this process started? If you all can just kind of walk them through those steps, Bill.
Well, I love just like when I saw it the first time, I love the picture, cup of coffee, tea. Last year you might have needed a sandwich or maybe, you know, some some additional things. Now it's more of a cup of coffee.
Alcoholic beverage last year to get through.
Exactly.
Only for parents, not students.
Exactly. So the FSAID, and this is a great moment to just take a moment there. And again, especially last year, but probably I'd say this year as well, the FSAID process in many cases is sort of a bigger deal. That whole process, then in a lot of families say to us, wow, the FSAID and getting that was a bigger deal than filing the FAFSA. Because the FSAID, this is just like when you're setting up a bank account or something for your investments or stuff like that. You want to be very serious about how you set it up, giving the right information and making sure you know your password and all these types of things. But this is the authorization. This is your account, and this is going to stick with you. The student needs an account. The contributor needs an account. So this is a very big deal. But sometimes we always let families know to get that set up ahead of time before we'll be at a school, let's say, and doing an event, because there's a lag period before you can now then have it all set and ready to go. In the old days, looking back a few years when we had the PIN, you would just get it done right at the same time. Now you get it done ahead of time. So the FSAID, which is the signature of the form and it's your key account, getting that ahead of time, getting that done, getting that off the list is a good thing. The 2023 federal tax form and W-2s, again, we get questions all the time. Oh, you mean 2024? And we're like, no, we mean 2023, as we're looking at this cohort of current seniors in high school for the most part. So that's what we're looking at there. And those types of things, untaxed income, child support, veterans, education benefits, these types of things, having that handy or having that at the ready is very helpful. And then different questions about cash and investment balances. And again, for my team of experts that are wonderful, what I always say, so much of the FAFSA is really straightforward these days. It is really when you get into parsing some of the investments, some of those types of things, that is where I see where people reach out to the experts, because people don't want to get that wrong. And that is a little nuanced sometimes. And that's really the part of the FAFSA now where people get nervous and they want to get that right.
Now, how do they complete the FAFSA? Like just the technical process of that. Like you see here the little student.gov picture here. If y'all can just walk us through that step.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So they go to FAFSA.gov and it'll take you to a slightly different URL, but that's easy to remember. And then, as Bill was just explaining, that's where you need that FAFSA, the FSA ID and password. You're going to use that your child will use that to log in to begin their FAFSA. And there's two-factor authentication, nothing new to all of us. We log into banking sites and everything. They're going to send a code to the email or they're going to text it. So make sure if you're working on that with your student that you got their phone so that you can get that code, or else you can't get in. That's how you get in. There's different ways to do this as far as flow. When we do our webinars, we share one flow just because it's confusing to go, well, you could do it this way, or you could do it this way. There are other ways that will work, but I'll just share the flow that we usually say. Go into that student FAFSA, start it as that says on the slide. There's a demographic section. There's just not hard to answer personal information just to get all of that in there. There's questions about dependency. A lot of kids, most kids are dependent of their parents potentially. Some kids are independent, so there'll be some questions. And if a student is independent, then they'll fall in there and there'll be other information that will be shared. But then they get to the section where they are inviting their contributors. And this is brand new as of 2 years ago. So the contributors, the definition of contributor changes depending on the family. Like I talked about earlier, if a family is divorced, that custodial parent, remember, that's the only parent that's getting the FSA ID and password. They're a contributor. So the student is going to invite either a contributor or contributors, depending on the family. If the parents are married and they file married filing jointly, there's one contributor. If the parents are married, but they file separate returns, they each need to be a contributor. They each get an FSA ID and password. And the reason being is, and we've mentioned it a couple times, remember that tax information, you're going to consent for that to directly move into your portion of the FAFSA. So if you have your own tax return, you have to consent to that. If you share a tax return with your spouse, then only one person says, yep, go ahead and move that in. So that's a really important part, the inviting. It's easy. You just put the information in, but I will say the information that you put in for the contributors has to perfectly match how they set up their FSA ID. If it's off ever so slightly, it can cause error messages. And that was a big one in the 24-25 school year. That was a big problem. So we tell people, go ahead, put in the contributor information, send that invite, and keep going. Keep going through the students' financials. It'll be their financials, their assets, and then in the student FAFSA, up to 20 colleges now, which is a great change because a lot of kids had more than 10 schools in the old FAFSA, and they had to go back in and do it again. I think most kids don't have more than 20. I've seen a few. If you have more than 20, you have to wait for it to process and go back in. But then you do your colleges, and then you hit submit, and then those contributors go get their invitation and they complete their part of the FAFSA. It will be shorter. They'll be automatically linked to that student FAFSA. They'll do their financials. Most likely it'll move over from the IRS and they'll answer asset questions because that can't move from the IRS. And then they're going to do the same thing. They're going to consent to have it moved. It's going to move They answer some financial questions as a contributor, and then they sign it. And then all goes well, a little pop-up says you're done and you're completed, and it gives a completion date, which we strongly recommend you screenshot that, whatever you want to do. The student should get an email saying that it's happened, but I just like, if you see that completion, just screenshot it so you have proof that you did get the FAFSA in. So that's the flow that we recommend.
And the only item I'll emphasize when we talk about, you were very clear about matching what is in the FSAID and last year for sure, but this is an ongoing thing. Parkway versus street, or sometimes an extra space, and getting the invitation to the contributor. So many times it's just really taking a deep breath, checking the spaces, checking to make sure you spelled out Parkway or PKWY, or some of these things that look so nitpicky. And that's what our team will just sit with a family, and sure enough, they make this change or that change to just be identical. And all of a sudden the request, the invitation appears, everybody can move forward, and it seems tiny, but it can really be all the difference in the world. And everything moves forward and off you go. And the other thing that we love this year, in most cases, if it feels like it was too easy to file, you probably did it right.
Yeah, I will say too, if you're going around and around and you can't figure out why it won't send, you could go and log into that person's studentaid.gov account, go to their, I forget what the tab is, but it's over on the left, and just look, okay, how did I set this up? And then you can see it. Oh yeah. And I had one dad one time, I'm like, are you sure that's your name? And he had put his middle name because that's what he goes by. And he swore to me he didn't. We log in, it's like, see, that's the problem. So you can always go and look if you're racking your brain and you just can't figure out why it's not matching, basically.
There's so many terms that folks filling out the FAFSA needs to know, right? From the SAI to the parent record contributor to family size. If y'all can just go through the terms that filers need to understand what they are and what they mean. And I'll start with you, Bill.
So just jumping on a couple quick ones. The one that I always like to go for first is the untaxed income or the academic year. These different items. We talked about the SAI. We talked about the expected family contribution. The student aid index is that thing that gets spit out when everything is put in. That's that magic number. That's that magic thing that is created when all of the contributor information and the student information is put in, and that's what is sent out there. And this is that index that is used by the states, that is used by the federal government, that's used by the schools to sort of rank families in order of how much aid they're going to get. So that's the important part. And for those that have filed the FAFSA in the past, the expected family contribution is what it was called previously, but they felt that term, might not, be the best way to phrase things. So the expected family contribution is now the student aid index, but you'll see expected family contribution floating around for at least a few more years. So you get questions like that. The parent of record or the contributor, and this is something that Peg and I talked about, and a lot of families will go to the FAFSA site and you can just look ahead of time. Okay, who should be giving the information? But Peg had pointed out, we're looking for who gave more aid. In the old days, previously, where the student, if there was a divorce situation, where the student was more in the last 365 days, where was it more? And that's not the case anymore. It's who gave more, who supplied more of the, who gave more resources as far as the raising. And that has changed. So that's who is needed on the contributor. And then if in the case of divorce, there is a step parent as well, then that information is needed as well. And I think we touched on one of the previous slides, how family size is such an important item, and used to be the item of how many students are in school at the same time, which is now treated differently. And then the academic year, looking ahead right now for seniors in high school, we're looking at 25, 26. But the only thing I just want to point out on that front, you'll see 2 FAFSAs able to be filed. So think about it. Right now, there are students that are in college that are filing the FAFSA, and they might be filing for right now for their current year. They're in college, and then a lot of students are in high school age. They're looking ahead to next year. So you want to make sure you file the right FAFSA. And that's just a few tidbits here, but we could talk for hours on this slide. So Peg, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, I would just say there is a question about in the Q&A about I didn't file when I was admitted. Can I file as a sophomore? Absolutely. The FAFSA, when you're in college, you need to submit that FAFSA every year. So if you didn't do it freshman year and you realize, yeah, I should have, no problem. Just, yeah, definitely do it. You're going to be doing it for your sophomore year. You can't go back, right, and grab other stuff. But yeah, just do it for your sophomore year. I would say just on the bottom right corner here with the expected family contribution, the reason why I really wanted to keep that in there is that there are a group of colleges that require a second financial aid form called the CSS profile that I mentioned earlier. They're still using that term. So we don't want people to be confused. Hey, Peg and Bo said that was long gone, and it's not. You will, and I actually think it's not a bad thing, because then it helps families understand, okay, SAI, that's a FAFSA only school. This school requires the FAFSA, but another form. But what they do is they take that cost of attendance that we talked about at the beginning that I said is kind of irrelevant because all the schools are discounting, and they subtract the SAI or the EFC. And that's how they figure out if you have need-based aid eligibility, right? If the school's 70,000 and your SAI is 20, then you have 50,000 of need. It doesn't mean that every school is going to swoop in and say, hey, Jones family, here's your 50K in grants. Most of them don't do that. That gets into the planning part of all of this, but hopefully that helps. The term untaxed income is, Uncle Sam has certain things that you're not going to pay tax on. Some of those things in financial aid, they are part of the mix. And that's the term untaxed income. A lot of things that were considered untaxed income and were added back to increase an EFC and now an SAI, they took off. So that's actually a good thing for families on the FAFSA, but that's what that means. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to have to pay federal income tax. They're just add backs in the financial aid world, basically.
And one quick item on one of the questions in the chat, can FAFSA help pay back loans from the school people use it for? If I'm reading that correctly, so you wouldn't file the FAFSA now trying to pay back a loan that was maybe from a year or two previously. It wouldn't work like that. But this goes to one of the key points that I think all of us are trying to make today. On the front end, ahead of time, filing the FAFSA, getting all the aid that you're eligible for helps limit or eliminate student loans. And that's on the front end. After the fact, then you have to look into refi or different consolidation or things like that. So that's why we're stressing so much getting the FAFSA filed on the front end and how important that is.
Now, what happens after they submit their FAFSA application? If you can just kind of walk through the chain of events from beginning to end.
Sure. You want me to? I'll roll with that one. Okay. So you submit the FAFSA. Like I said, that screen pops up and says, congratulations, it's done. Basically, that information gets sent to all the colleges that you put on your child's FAFSA, and it's moving very well this year. It's not instantaneous, but I think it's moving within about 24 hours. And the college gets all that information. The financial aid office gets that, and then they get to go to work. If your child's admitted, they go to work on creating that financial aid package that Bill and I have been talking about. That's what they use. The state will also use it to award. And then, of course, they will award federal aid. The financial aid offices understand how that works. And if you're Pell eligible, work study, FSEOG is another grant, that will show up on there, okay? You can access your FAFSA info. And when I say you, I mean the student is going to log into their studentaid.gov account. As I said earlier, there's a FAFSA submission summary, and you can go in there and see your information. An email confirmation that your information has been sent to the schools. I'm going to be totally transparent. I didn't even know the government was doing that, but if they're doing that, that's awesome. If they're letting them know, but they're called ICERs and they're going right away. Now, some colleges are telling kids, hey, you're not going to hear from us and get a package till January 31st, one school that one of our families was working with. And that's on their end. That's not because the information isn't there. That's them translating that information through software that they use to create the packages. So just keep that in mind. And don't be shy. If colleges are sharing stuff, you can always reach out to the financial aid office, you know, and ask a question. Once they do all that stuff, then your child will receive what's called a financial aid award letter. And ideally, it's got everything on there. It's got the cost of attendance, hopefully broken down. There are over 900 versions of these financial aid award letters, which is very confusing. Some of them are very brief and others are awesome. They have everything you want, but it's going to list the different sort of aid your child got. Merit scholarships, it's not just need-based aid that will show up. Loans, work study, federal aid, the institutional grants, everything hopefully is on there. And then
And I'll
that's where
just
you lay those down on the dining room table and you start comparing, and that's when you can start thinking about appealing and different things.
And I'll just grab the negative SAI question because I love that one this year. One of the other changes with the FAFSA this past year was instead of 0, the old bottom used to be an expected family contribution of 0. And now we've gone below 0. Now we're at negative 1,500. So you can have a negative SAI. And the schools last year, especially with the FAFSA being broken and the difficulties, they have to kind of deal with how they're going to treat it. So now, we're now in year 2 of this, so it's going to evolve. But a lot of schools kind of treated it like 0 was okay. Negative 1,500 is also going to be 0. Negative 1,500 doesn't mean you're going to get $1,500 more per se than a 0. It shows that you're at the bottom of the realm, first in for aid, but how it is treated by the schools, we're going to learn as the years go by.
Peg, you just said something about just the understanding your financial aid offer letter, which is our next topic. So if you can just kind of cover that briefly in terms of just the cost of attendance, the student aid index, and you know what all that means as they're moving forward.
Yeah, so on that, yeah, sorry, I jumped a little bit ahead on the slides, didn't I? So yeah, so and like I said, ideally this is on there so you can see the cost for the college, and they should be the estimated for the 25-26 school year, not old numbers. They should be, you know, they're not official yet, but they should inflate them so that you have a pretty good idea of what the total cost is going to be. They lay that out. And then some of them put the student aid index. It's very transparent if it's a FAFSA school because you know the student aid index. You go and look it up. If it didn't show up on the confirmation, you go look it up at the studentaid.gov account. Very, very transparent. So that's what they're doing. They're taking that cost of attendance, they're subtracting that SAI, and that's your need. And then they come in and meet it with grants, scholarships, work study, loans. That will all be listed there. Some schools have their own loans. So it's not just the federal direct loans. There's a parent loan that's called a PLUS loan that's a federal loan. Those are the 2 loans. But the merit scholarships, as I said, will show up as well, which are not based on need, but it's still money that the college is giving that student because they want to attract that student to their college. So they're discounting their costs. And some of the kids that get those awards, their parents on paper can write a full check and pay, but the college really doesn't care. It's like, we want that student. We're going to discount, even though they might be able to afford to pay full price. And then, as I said before, this is where the comparing, and somebody had a question in the Q&A about how they said, how do I negotiate? I would tell you, first of all, take that word out of your mind. You're not buying a car, and you don't want to approach the colleges that way because it'll really turn them off, and they won't say anything to you, but that could hurt you getting a positive result from the appeal. Think about it as reaching out to them, being honest if you have a change in circumstance, or there's different, that's a whole webinar in and of itself, effective appeals on the merit side and the need-based side. But once you have these award letters, understanding them, so you're comparing apples to apples, even though they might have a different format. And then if they're competing schools, you can appeal if your financial circumstances, and we always get this question, well, I lost my job last year, like 2023 is not my reality. That's a perfect time. It's crummy that you lost your job, but let's try and make that turn lemons into lemonade, right? So that maybe you'll get some more money from the college because your current financial situation is different. So that's where that comparing the award letters comes in, and being able to appeal and competing colleges and that sort of thing.
And I completely agree with Peg. There are also times where the schools thought X number of students were going to do this or X number of students were going to come, and then they didn't. So asking politely, hey, can you take another look or this or that? But I completely agree with the negotiating word. I completely agree with that. But sometimes other dollars do become available, but you have to understand it very well may not happen, but it might. So if you're polite and you approach it properly, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and the financial aid packages come, that's a question in the Q&A at all different times. It's dependent on when you applied and the college. So it's really a question for the individual colleges. There's not a uniform date.
Now we're going to try to work our way through some of the most frequently asked questions, and I'll give them to you one at a time. What if the student or their parents are undocumented or underdocumented? I know you touched on this a little bit, but if you could just go into a little bit so then we can work our way through the rest of the questions.
You want me to take that one, Bill? This is a big one that's going on now with the new administration that's about to step in, and there's been a lot of talk of deportations and stuff, and people have said, what do I do? Is that going to hurt me? And we don't know. I know it's scary, and that's what we have to tell you. We don't know if you're undocumented and you submit, you are on a radar, if you will. So you want to keep that in mind. As I said earlier, different states have different ways of helping that population. So definitely look into your state to see, like I said, the state of Washington has a separate form so that that population can get some aid and some help when they're going to college.
And another question is, what if what if they are a foster child or they have a foster child, right? And what if the income changed? They lost their job and they only worked for 4 months. Bill.
And let's go to that one very quickly. So as Peg had pointed out a moment ago, the income changing, where you now try to make lemonade, and the special circumstances aspect of all this. The FAFSA is the FAFSA. The form wants what the form wants. And in so many cases now, the information comes right underneath in the pipeline, comes right from the IRS. So think about when we've had different upheavals with the economy or things like that, or COVID or whatnot. You have a period of time that the information of income is wanted. But we talk about special circumstances, reaching out to the financial aid office. This is what was in the FAFSA, but that is not the world I'm living in right now. And the school will often say, send us this, send us this, send us this, because the school has to have documentation when they're going to make a special circumstances determination. So income changing is a very big deal. The FAFSA will take what the FAFSA wants, but that doesn't mean that the school can't step in and make an adjustment.
And what if my or my parents' marital status has changed? Is one question. And how can they see their estimated awards, right?
Yeah, so if in that prior year in 2023, say you were married and now you're separated, when you say that, when you get into the FAFSA, you're going to fall into an exception where that financial data is not going to move from the IRS. If it's working correctly, you should be asked for your earnings as the custodial parent and your AGI and the taxes that you paid, because as we've talked about, only that parent is submitting. So you will fall into that exception, and you should be able to get through the FAFSA putting in only the information that's going to matter because your marital status has changed. And then who should fill out the FAFSA? That's what I went through before. It's going to be the student and then the contributors. And it's really dependent on a lot of it is the marital status of the parents. If they're married filing jointly, one person is submitting it as the contributor. Separately, it's two. And then again, if divorced or separated, just that custodial parent is filling out the FAFSA form with the student.
And is the FAFSA the only financial form that they need to fill out?
Most schools only require the FAFSA to do for state, federal, and institutional aid. There is another form that I mentioned a couple times, the CSS profile. There's about 250, mostly private schools, that will require that along with the FAFSA, not in lieu of the FAFSA. You still have to submit the FAFSA, but you also have to submit that form. And that's a very different form, much longer. But you want to make sure you know that it's administered by College Board, because if you miss that form, they can't award financial aid to your child.
Now, we're going to give the audience a little bit of time to put in the chat some questions. I know we had some questions earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and work through those questions to our panelists, and we'll try to answer them as succinctly as possible with the short amount of time that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and go back through the chat. So go ahead and just put your questions in the chat right now, and I'm going to work through them and submit those to our panelists. You have already answered a lot of them already, so I'll try to go through the ones that have not been answered thus far. One person asked, I'm going back to school for my degree and my daughter will be going to college too. Will that affect how much I will receive? Do I file the separate FAFSA?
So the FAFSA is for the student. Now, in the case here, if the parent is a student, then they are a student here. So they file the student and the student files the student, but then the parent will have the information on the student form as well. I think I said that correctly. There was a lot of students in that answer.
Yeah,
So
the
the student,
parent will do their own FAFSA as the student, and then the parent will be the parent with their child's student FAFSA. So that's how it works, yeah.
two FAFSAs.
Does the FAFSA only apply to certain colleges and universities is another question.
It applies, I mean, there's very few schools that don't take the FAFSA. I think you could not even fill two hands with them. So just make the assumption that the school requires the FAFSA. When you're in there, if you go searching and you can't find it, that means that's one of the very few schools that doesn't require the FAFSA.
You could easily email the folks on this thing here. If you think you found one, shoot us a note, but
Yeah.
Can the FAFSA help pay tuition for an online school such as CGMA or CG Spectrum, if you're familiar with those programs?
I don't know that one in particular, but it absolutely can. I just don't know those in particular.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with those two as well, but yeah, being an online school doesn't disqualify the FAFSA.
And another person says, does the FAFSA go through the college, university before the exact amount comes back?
And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. So again, the FAFSA is the form, get the FAFSA filed, and then Washington does their thing, the state does their thing, whichever state you're in, and then the college does their information as well. And so that award letter that Peg gave a really nice explanation about, that's going to combine all the different types of aid. And so file the FAFSA, get it done, and then let all the different federal, state, school, and maybe even other give the funding that they're going to give, the financial aid that they're going to give, and then you know what you owe or don't.
Can the FAFSA help pay back loans from the school people use it for?
And I think we had touched on this one a little bit earlier. That's you don't, depending on when it was, like if you went to school 3 years ago and you had some loans, you don't file the FAFSA now to try to pay that back. And I'm not exactly certain what the question was getting at, but you can help avoid additional loan debt or loan debt if you file the FAFSA now, so that you don't need loans or you need smaller amounts of loans. But looking backwards a bit, that horse is out of the barn.
I've already filled out the FAFSA and it is currently pending, but they emailed me my estimated SAI and I'm happy with it. If I were in a couple of months to be accepted for a scholarship that covers 75% of my tuition, will my FAFSA money be deduced?
That if you get an outside scholarship, typically they're going to ask where you're going to college and they're going to send that to that college. Then that's going to hit up either half the first semester, half the second. Sometimes the scholarship will actually dictate how it should hit up. That can reduce, it's called scholarship displacement. It can reduce what the college gives you because it's considered an outside resource. That's the tricky thing about outside scholarships is sometimes they're wonderful, sometimes you're not ahead of the game. It just depends on the situation.
Is there anything an older full-time employed grad student can do to have a higher chance of getting assistance?
Grad school is a different can of worms, right? You know, if you go to grad, you can fill out the FAFSA, go to grad school, absolutely. But you don't see a lot of institutional grants for grad students, right? You're usually going to become a TA. It, I taught through grad school, so they paid me a small stipend and covered my tuition, so I got out debt free. There are scholarships sometimes, but it's not analogous to the undergrad experience. You can definitely submit it, but a lot of grad students have zero EFCs, but they're not saying, oh, we're meeting 100% of need and we're paying. You know, it's just you got to do some digging to find jobs and scholarships that might be specific to your program.
What does a negative SAI mean?
Yeah, I think Bill covered that one because he saw it. Yeah, we got that one. I did see, I just want to answer this one because it's one of the biggest mistakes people make. Someone said, should I include my 401k and IRA?
Oh,
Absolutely not. Retirement accounts are not included on the FAFSA. The question will say net worth of investments, and it should say in there, non-retirement assets only. So if you've been a good saver, and you've got a 403b, 401k, Roth IRAs, that's retirement. That's always pension, traditional IRAs. Those are all retirement accounts. Do not include those. It'll shoot up your SAI. You'll get less aid and you'll never know why. And the college won't know that you made the mistake. They just look at, I mean, the FAFSA takes the number and puts it in the calculation. So only non-retirement money that you have and then checking and savings they will ask about as well.
Does that include being on disability, SSID? Does that affect the FAFSA in any way?
They're going to look at whatever's on the tax return. That's the new rule. So if you're receiving income that's taxable and shows up on your 1040, it's going to be part of it. A lot of income that doesn't, that falls into that untaxed income bucket that was on the slide. And a lot of that won't. Somebody wrote, praise God, there's no IRA. I love that. That's great. A lot of that won't be included. And also, if you're on certain federal benefit programs, that's going to be a question on the FAFSA. Make sure you read through that. And if you're in any of those programs, you mark that because that will help tremendously with the SAI calculation as well.
If I live on my own, do I still need a parent contributor information?
You want to take that one, Bill?
yeah. So in short, it's not living. So you could be a dependent student that needs the information from the contributor. You could be in that situation, but you have your own apartment. You know, you're living on your own. So it's the definition of who is dependent or who is independent, not do I have an apartment of my own or not. And so it's that definition that'll determine if you need a contributor or not. As I say at my financial aid nights, a student at 18 stomping their feet saying, I'm done with you, does not make them independent.
Yeah, you have to be over 24 or be married or have kids or there's a few things that if you answer yes to them, you're independent, but most kids are not able to answer yes, so they are still dependent.
Do I get different FAFSA aid if I take summer classes through a community college after already finishing a year of college at another college?
Same FAFSA, and it would look at trailer versus header. But I'm just taking a simple example here. If you filed the FAFSA, you went to college A during an academic year, and then you start in the summer at a new college, you would file the FAFSA for the new year, the proper FAFSA, and then that college would look at that new academic year as however they treat it, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Can I still apply for FAFSA even though I have my first degree and I'm low income?
If you're going back to school, you can submit the FAFSA. Yep.
And you may have touched on this already, but it's in the chat again. How long does it take for a college to get your FAFSA information?
It moves usually within about 24 hours. That doesn't mean you're going to hear from the college the day after that. Then the college has to go to work to take that information and create a package, but it goes to the college very quickly.
And as long as that particular question is coming in today as opposed to a year ago, that's a great answer.
A year ago, it was an eternity for the college to get the information.
I'm going to go ahead and read the last two questions. And I encourage you, if you did not get your question answered, please reach out to Bill and Peg's companies after to schedule a time where they can go over your specific case scenario. Because I know we want to be mindful of everybody's time on this webinar here today. So I'm going to go ahead and read the last two questions, and then we'll go ahead and try to wrap everything up here today. If I had issues with my FAFSA that affected the amount of financial aid I received from my school, causing me to be unable to register for courses this upcoming semester, will I be provided additional time to be able to register? Is there anything I can do to request more time?
I would reach out to the college and talk to them about that, because that's going to be something you're going to work through with that individual college that you're going to.
And there's a question here that says, what happens if I don't get as much as I need on your FAFSA? Our next slide will cover this about additional resources, so we'll come back to that. I'll just read the last other question here, and then we'll wrap things up. Does FAFSA have a Pell Grant for those pursuing second bachelor's degrees?
I'm not sure about that, Bill. I mean, I don't know that you can get a Pell if you already got a Pell. I don't know if you can get it again.
I don't think so. You file the
FAFSA
FAFSA to try to be eligible for any type of aid, but I don't think so. I don't think you'll get that at that point. I would definitely research it a little bit, but I don't think so. But file the FAFSA anyway.
Yeah, definitely file the FAFSA anyway.
So the last question asked about what happens if I don't get enough, right? So we can just briefly, if y'all can cover in terms of just scholarships and various options, and then I'll go over some additional options in terms of private loans for students who may not get enough money to cover the cost of attendance. Bill?
Yeah, so again, we we do the A to Z as far as scholarships go. Again, we in our presentations that we give at high schools, we just talk about, the duct tape scholarships and the McDonald's scholarships and just everything. And we talk about students that were sure they were going to get no scholarship. And we have examples where it was only eligible for people from another state, and a creative student reached out anyway, and they got the scholarship and were told nobody else applied for it. $500, $1,000 scholarships. There's so many times when you're competing with almost no one. The $50,000 scholarships and a trip to Aruba, you're probably competing with a lot of people. But the smaller ones, you would be surprised how few people are going for it. So we believe in it. We think it's a great thing. Do it, apply, do searches. We always say, don't pay for scholarships. The places that are most reputable, they're not asking money for those scholarships. But soup to nuts, A to Z, we think it's a good thing.
Yeah, just maximize what you're getting from the college, and then do your scholarships for icing on the cake.
And as we discussed, there's sometimes when the offer letter may not be enough, and you have to look at other things like scholarships, as Peg and Bill just said, but also sometimes you have to look at private loans and options that are available to you out there. And we just kind of want to cover for students who do fall into this scenario. Ascent does offer private student loans to cover your cost of attendance. We provide undergraduate and graduate loans at flexible repayment options. And we also have no cosigner required for eligible students. We have a parent loan too that's also designed to offer families a better borrowing experience and lots of benefits. For example, like our Ascent program, which is kind of a unique program that provides students with additional resources for personal and professional growth, including mentorship opportunities, paid internship opportunities, career preparation tools as well. as resources for additional scholarships, financial literacy, and some cashback rewards and options. So if you do fall into this bracket where you are short of funds, please look into Ascent, and you can go to our website or ascentfunding.com to get more details about that. Right now, before we wrap up, we just want to kind of just go over like the next things. Go to the studentaid.gov to complete your FAFSA application. If you started it, if you haven't started it, you can go ahead and do that there. Explore your various options too in terms of scholarship. As Bill said, sometimes $1,000 scholarships, that adds up, and that can go ahead and help you bolster your options available to you. If you do fall into the situation where you have to look at private loans, so look at your various options that are out there, including obviously Ascent, and we offer those, as I said. And once again, if you would like some more guidance on unique strategies for your families, please reach out to Peg or Bill's companies to directly schedule an appointment to kind of give you expert advice on your specific case scenario, because this was designed to give you some general information, and it may not have answered your specific family questions, but their companies can definitely help you with that. And please watch out for our email for those that stayed fully through the webinar to determine the winner of the scholarship, and hopefully that goes towards your school coming up this fall here as well. I want to thank you so much for attending this webinar. Please reach out to us, and our email addresses are there if you have any further questions. Thank you so much.